special seminar for International Women's Day 2026. And in the spirit of International Women's Day, I'd like to introduce my colleagues that I'm here with, which is Lauren Rogers, who works at Impact as our Senior Research Coordinator, and Becky Parker, who's our Research Project Administrator. So we've got a really lovely seminar today with some amazing speakers. So we're just going to get started. And our first speaker today is Tanya Fosdick. So Tanya is going to be speaking about breaking the pattern, choosing support over competition in a male-dominated world. Tanya is a research director at Agilysis, trustee at the Road Safety Trust, and principal research associate at Road Safety Analysis. Beginning her career in road safety within a highly dominated policing environment, Tanya discovered early on how transformative women-centred support can be. This is a practical, honest reflection on solidarity, growth, and the impact of choosing community over competition. Can't wait to hear it. So over to you, Tanya.
Thank you so much. And firstly, I want to thank the Impact team for inviting me to speak at this event for International Women's Day, particularly for this year's theme of Give to Gain, which, when you hear my story, has shaped a great many of my attitudes to work in life and my career. It does feel a little strange, though. There have been so many inspirational women who have influenced me over the years, so being counted amongst those who can share their thoughts in the hope of supporting others is truly humbling. I'm also really quite used to presenting on road safety topics, never talking about myself, so this does feel a little bit odd, so bear with me. However, I'd like to start my talk today by going back to the beginning of my path in road safety when I worked for the police as a support staff analyst. My role was unique. It was my job to analyse casualty and speed data to inform the Safety Camera Partnership in its operations. It involved recommending new sites for approval and providing performance statistics for the partnership board, alongside developing enforcement strategies for officers. The core team I worked with was small and wonderful. I was in my 20s and I'd found a job that I loved with colleagues who were supportive. But this small team was sat within wider policing, which was highly male-dominated. Getting my voice heard within such an environment, being young and female, was incredibly challenging. I think I was pretty good at my job. Even in those early days, I was being recognised for my work within the National Road Safety Partnership community. But having the confidence to deliver my recommendations and analysis was hard. And I have a few examples of challenging situations which reflect the working environment I was within. The first is about being heard, and is possibly one of the most ludicrous work situations I've ever been in. I'd undertaken a great deal of research and analysis into the local young driver problem and was working with the team on the development of a new intervention. I remember being sat in a conference room with 3 male officers. I talked through my analysis and recommendations, but it became clear that one of the officers had no respect for me. It wasn't that he wasn't paying attention to me, he was actively not listening to what I had to say. One of the others started to repeat what I was saying, word for word, which then led to sensible conversations between the 3 men as to what the intervention could look like. It felt like I was a ghost, with the friendly officer acting as a medium. It was clear that the research and the analysis was worth listening to, but apparently I wasn't. Another situation that still makes me roll my eyes is related to voices being heard, is about conference presentations. Road safety is still fairly male-dominated, and often conference agendas can be full of male presenters. It's a reflection of the sector. The people who speak are the people who work in the field. We often joke about panels being pale, male and stale. Now, this is no disrespect to those older white males who are in the field, but there's often a lack of representatives who are young, female, or from an ethnic minority background. I did hear once hear a male conference organiser explain, in the presence of me and another female presenter, how he sought to overcome the disparity in representation. He said that he looked at the LinkedIn profiles to find attractive young women in road safety and then asked them to come and present. Now, that wasn't flattering. It meant that I was only on the stage because of how I looked, not because of what I could say. Another situation which made me feel uncomfortable was when I was asked to accompany a senior officer to present to the chief officers, all of whom were men. We were presenting a business case, and I was there to share the data and analysis behind it. The police officers were all going to be in full uniform, whereas I was going to be in civilian dress. It was suggested to me that I should wear a short, tight skirt and heels to appeal to those male chief officers. I felt a bit like a plaything, certainly objectified, and it felt irrelevant to the work I'd done or the contribution I could make to the business case. It also made me feel like I had no control or ownership of my own image. There were many other times when I suffered sexism and misogyny in those early days of my career, and it made it difficult to progress and develop with confidence. Until I met a new superintendent who undoubtedly helped me to become the professional I am today. She believed in women-centred support through mentoring and networking programs. One of the problems of operating in a male-dominated environment is that it can shape how women behave towards one another. Competition between women can be toxic. To be the token woman on the panel or to be interviewed for the promotion, there can be a perception that you have to trample over other women to be the one to be there to compete against the men. Imagine an internal promotion opportunity becomes available with 5 candidates to be interviewed. It's likely that as a matter of course, 4 will be men because it's a numbers game. As a woman, to be that 5th interviewee, you need to stand out over and above other female candidates. You need to promote your qualities and reduce those of others. Or do you? My perceptions of how I can be as a female professional changed when I attended a Women in Policing conference with my superintendent and some female colleagues from my team. One of the speakers, and I'm really sorry that I can't remember the name of someone who changed my perspective so deeply, talked about that interview process and the negative competition between female colleagues. In that world, no woman wins. If we spend our time belittling those around us, dismissing their skills, experience and talents, undermining their potential, then yes, we may succeed in making it unlikely that they're considered for that promotion or progression. But let's not forget, our competitors will be doing the same to us. Our skills, experience, talents will also be being undermined. So we won't be considered for promotion or progression either. The likely outcome is that 5th interview spot will be occupied by another man, and no woman would be put forward for the role. That Women in Policing conference is that we ought to flip that competition on its head. The solution is so easy to do. We give to gain. Imagine a working environment where we're constantly lifting each other up. If we spend time and energy promoting the skills, experience and talents of other women, we all win, we all rise. And it does take a lot of time and energy to build that environment. It's about sharing positive comments and feedback about our female colleagues as a matter of course. If we highlight the accomplishments of other women around us and they are doing the same for us, we can really cut through the male-dominated world we work in. Instead of 4 male candidates in that pool of 5, we change the narrative so there are 3 or 4 strong female candidates being interviewed. And yes, at that point there is competition, but, and this is really important, we should be gracious and positive towards whoever gets that job, because that will be noticed. And if this opportunity isn't the one for us, that positive environment will ensure that it isn't the only opportunity. We will have built a community where we all support each other as we rise. Of course, this isn't the only answer, and there is wider work to be done through mentoring, training, and network creation. But for me, at that early point in my career, it was a game changer. It helped me to gain confidence because I was hearing from others what I was capable of. It can be slightly uncomfortable and embarrassing to hear others praise you, but surely we all want to work in an environment where we are valued. The power of women lifting women is twofold. Whilst we're changing the external narrative around how we are perceived, it's also important for our personal self-belief and confidence to have our skills recognised by others. It makes us more likely to continue to invest in ourselves and our growth paths. Not long after the Women in Policing conference, I chose to move on to work with the team I'm now with. I started as an analyst in a small team and worked my way up to being head of research and then director. I don't think I reflected much on being a woman in the workplace much in those years from an internal perspective. I work with a great team and it feels an inclusive workplace. But there were still multiple times when I was still operating in a wider male-dominated field, and there were instances where I felt I wasn't taken seriously, with my work not having the standing of male colleagues around me. On reflection, One way I found dealing with this was by surrounding myself with incredible women, and we've built a community where we continue to support each other. It's been a real privilege to collaborate on projects and share a stage with these women. We use the same principles of lifting each other. By sharing each other's research, referencing each other's presentations, and highlighting each other's accomplishments, we're all building an environment where we are taken seriously and empowering each other on our respective journeys. I did tag a few women in a post last week on LinkedIn, but quickly found there were too many to comply with the tagging rules, which is actually rather great in itself. There are too many women I would want to acknowledge. Now, I do have to admit to some wobbles when it came to joining the two boards I currently sit on. I became a director of Agilysis, a leading road safety consultancy, in 2021. In the months leading up to this move, I had a fair amount of self-doubt. I think this is fairly normal for any big step up in role, regardless of who we are. But there were moments when I wondered if I was overstretching myself and my place in the world. The founding directors were all male. Did I belong amongst them? Would I be listened to? Luckily, I wasn't making this move on my own, as a female colleague was becoming finance director at the same time. Thinking back, taking this step with another woman gave me the confidence to acknowledge that I did deserve to be on that board and that I had a lot to contribute. Together, we found a new voice, and I'm sure that the chaps would say that we hold our own. We've embarked on mentoring programs together, and the last 4 and a bit years seem to have flown by as we've grown personally and as a company. I think it would be a very different board if we hadn't have joined it together. Collectively, we've been able to shape the way the organisation has evolved. I'm also really proud to hold additional positions as a trustee of the Road Safety Trust, an honorary advisory panel member of the Road Ethics Project in South Africa, and patron of the Road Victims Trust. Back as a 20-something-year-old in the police, I would never have imagined that I would be able to represent my profession in these ways. One thing I'd like to briefly focus on is the importance of not compromising who we are as women as we navigate this path. I'm a huge believer in not changing the way we act professionally in order to be taken seriously in a male-dominated environment. I've had other female business leaders suggest that it's worth dressing and behaving more masculinely to be heard and be treated as an equal. I disagree wholeheartedly. We should be proud of who we are and the experiences and perspectives we bring to the workplace as women. To change ourselves through our behaviour, our persona, our image is doing an injustice to what we can contribute. Coming to the point, back to the point about competition, if we think we need to compete with men by behaving like men in order to succeed, we're not only likely to fail, but we are also doing our contributions as women a disservice. We can be strong, talented, passionate, compassionate professionals and not compromise who we are as individuals. For those who know me, that means having a rather fabulous collection of shoes. The way I dress doesn't detract from what I can deliver as a researcher or a leader. If we concentrate on developing a supportive environment for women where we can be our true selves, there'll be no need to worry about trying to compete with men by being like them. And coming back to that earlier situation with the chief officers, the difference now is that I own my image and I'm not looking the way I do for anyone but myself. And I think that's really important. Thinking about competition with men, it's also important to recognise the role that men can play in lifting us up. We mustn't turn our back on male allies. Let's not be judgmental about the men around us, and we should respect all of the people who can help us. I've had some great male mentors, and we don't have to create an isolated sisterhood to be able to grow as women. We should all get to be comfortable in an inclusive, supportive workplace. In fact, if we work with our male allies in challenging toxic masculinity, then we all benefit, as none of us have to conform to negative stereotypes. I want to wrap up by looking to the future. I hope that as I've progressed through my career, I've developed a leadership style which emulates a little of what I benefited from in the actions of that superintendent all those years ago. Building a positive culture within our organisation through the creation of an inclusive workplace is something I'm hugely passionate about. I try to be a positive role model to the women who are following in my footsteps, both within Agilysis and within the wider sector. And I'm really proud that I'm leading on an early careers programme to help grow the leaders and experts of the future. We never shy away from praising each other and promoting achievements. Little nods to the successes of others can make such a big difference in nurturing a growth mindset. I like to think that I'm an example of what can be achieved when you give to gain. That superintendent gave of herself to support the women around her, including me. Now, she ended up as a chief officer, and I'm sure that her positive outlook and support of others benefited her as well as me and others. This is something that I hope I and you can continue to do. And so I think the messages are simple. Celebrate the success of the women around you. Identify ways to raise each other up. Build support networks. Concentrate on community rather than competition. And acknowledge that we gain when we give. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That was such a lovely, honest, personal reflection of your career and your experiences. I'm sure there's many women on this call that resonated with some of your stories there and touched something in them. I really urge everyone to stay to the end. I probably should have said when I was introducing, there'll be a chance to ask questions to the panel at the end. So if you have anything to ask, we can put it then. But yeah, thank you so much. That was really, really great. Okay, so next we're hearing from Dr. Claire Baker. Claire is am I saying this right? Is it Schmidt? Is that right?
Yeah.
AI, AI for Science Research Fellow in Design Engineering at Imperial College London, where she works on using accessible technology and data-driven trauma biomechanics to improve emergency healthcare. So I'll pass the baton over to you, Claire.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Kerry. I'll just get my slides up. First up, real privilege to be sandwiched between two amazing women today. And thank you all for attending. Looking forward to the discussion later as well. I've taken a slightly different approach to Tanya's amazing reflections. So I'm going to go through kind of my research and bits of my research journey and try and kind of pull in some personal reflections as I go along the way. So a little bit of background into me. So I finished my PhD 3 years ago and kind of went straight through from school to undergrad to a couple of masters and stayed through that academic trackway, starting off in physics, extremely male-dominated environment. And then as I've moved more towards emergency medicine and engineering in that context, it's become more diverse in all ways, which has been really exciting kind of pathway along. I'm now in design engineering, which might be a new concept for some of you on the call today. It's really kind of trying to link together the technical and human aspects of challenges, so overcoming them in a really interdisciplinary way. And I think that's something that I personally really love. And we have this tagline around making things better over just making better things, which is something that really resonates with me. So I'm interested in a few different areas, as Kerry mentioned, accessible sensing and using biomechanics, so the kind of understanding of the physics behind injury to inform prevention and mitigation. And I use a variety of different computational techniques to do that. Because it is super interdisciplinary, I get the privilege of collaborating with amazing groups and people across both healthcare and engineering sectors. And I think that's somewhere where I've personally gained massively in terms of what those different partners have led into me, both in terms of real resource and also, supporting my professional growth as I go on. I sit as well, really interested in the research having a kind of real world impact. So I hold several different kind of policy and expert roles across sensing-based injury prediction. And in a couple of companies as well, looking at mitigation using smartphone technology. So to give a little bit of a visual explanation behind trauma biomechanics, here is an example of an in-depth crash case of a pedestrian involved in an incident from the UK in-depth dataset that we use quite frequently in our research. You can see the kind of quite blurry CCTV footage on the left, and then our multi-body computational model of the pedestrian on the right. What we look to do is take real world evidence, such as video footage from the scene or the damage profile on the front of the vehicle, and match that into a kind of digital twin copy of the crash. We can then use that to understand how the body reacts to that incident from a kind of physical perspective, what forces they're exposed to, what accelerations they're exposed to, and from that side understand injury outcomes. So here's another example from a similar case, much worse CCTV, but here we're able to kind of vary the different realistic scenarios and identify how that kind of collision unfolded. The other great thing about this kind of computational approach is that we're able to look at not only different scenarios, but explore around different demographic properties and things like that. So I'm involved in OVTO, who do the online virtual testing organisation, who essentially are looking to democratize more demographically representative computational models, which is kind of feeding into road safety, which is this kind of, especially in vehicle testing, quite traditionally biased towards male-dominated, 50th on male, etc. Another kind of output then of what this type of research does. So we do a lot around head injury biomechanics, brain injury biomechanics, and understanding how those brain injuries are caused, but then we also are keen to translate that out into impact. So for example, looking at cyclists, looking at realistic impact scenarios, which we can do in our lab with our crash test dummy head that has really expensive high fidelity sensors, that we can then build relationships to different types of injury through historic data. And then this sort of thing outputs into kind of consumer rating programs, things like this. So we always try to bring our research kind of through. And that's been recognised kind of both for the science and the sort of societal impact as well. So for the main bit today, I'm going to speak through a little bit more around my programme using kind of sensor-based setups, and then highlight a few key time points along the way where mentors have kind of given me access to opportunities that have helped push me forwards, and where hopefully I've tried to do the same for others too. So I'm really interested in the emergency medicine context and how we can leverage sensors that are becoming more and more available to support people there. So half of all global deaths occur in emergency medicine, and as high as 54% of these are deemed to be amenable, so avoided with altered response or care. Of those deaths, injury is the most deadly, accounting for just over a fifth, and 1 in 3 of those occur on the roads globally. So preaching to the converted, probably at an impact seminar, but really kind of key challenge there, but giving opportunity because these can be preventable and mitigable. So the sensors can basically enable us in that post-incident stage. So obviously, ideally, we can mitigate and prevent, but where that's not possible, changing actions along after that initial incident occurs can really change people's outcomes. So this care gap on the road injury train of survival that Tim and co have put together between that first and third chain is kind of where I'm looking to focus on and trying to close that with technology and automatic triage using sensors that are available. So across Europe and North America and several areas in Asia as well, eCall already notifies emergency services to the location of a crash. So when the airbags trigger or similar, that GPS location is sent across via voice or data link to the public service answering point, who can then help initiate that emergency response. But the challenge there is that doesn't necessarily give the information about what type of response is needed. It just gives location alone. The kind of gold standard and next generation of this, there's 3 different examples, a national one in Japan, and then a couple of others by specific vehicle manufacturers, goes a step further. So they use sensor information, not just the location of the incident, but also things like the change in speed, so the physical exposure of the crash, which we know to link through to injury, and things like seatbelt status to give more of an estimation of risk of severe injury. However, there's a few both technical and human kind of gaps in this around limitations to health outcome predictions that link through to what emergency service personnel actually need. Detection limitations, we're not making the most of some of the dynamic information we have, and then also not so integrating with the existing frameworks that exist in the emergency response infrastructure. And a bit of a misalignment with global burden, given that a lot of these sensors are focused kind of based on the vehicle themselves. So my work's looked to tackle a few different parts of these. Firstly, looking to overcome technical challenges in predicting specific injuries. So in order to kind of close this gap, we need linked collision healthcare data, which can be really challenging to find. Fortunately, within the UK, we have access to the Road Accident In-Depth Studies data set that has over 3,000 fields of all sorts of information you could hope to find, linking collision and healthcare factors in quite a lot of detail. So at the time of this study back in 2022, we had just over 2,000 incidents involving 5,000 people, the majority of whom were aged over 16, with a 60 to 30 male to female split approximately. This work looked to kind of bring a few novel bits. So rather than just using an engineering-derived anatomical-based assessment of injury, we looked to align more closely with clinical measures, particularly the Mayo Traumatic Brain Injury Classification. And this was done in collaboration with teams at Imperial across medicine and brain sciences. This approach used kind of free text to pull out more information from things like the ambulance record with very high accuracy and kind of go a step beyond, which is really important for brain injury that sometimes misses some of the more mild injuries that can have really substantial long-term outcomes. So within our data set, we found around 600 traumatic brain injury groups, and we also did some scaling to estimate the level across the UK. But I think given the new Prana data set, we'll probably be looking to revise that as we go forwards. The main key contribution, though, was these risk functions that can relate brain injury to change in speed and this dynamics. So we're trying to go really from that physics information that can be captured by those sensors through to the injury outcomes. We were able to do so for cohorts of car occupants and vulnerable road users, and we also saw some distinctions for specific types of injury, such as subarachnoid hemorrhage and skull fracture, that were much higher risk for vulnerable road users, as well as focal injury. Because we're looking at trying to leverage these models not just to create a prediction, but to actually further forwards kind of go into triage, we looked at how our assessment has under and over triage within it. So for our car occupant model, although our prediction ability was pretty good, when we come to actually apply it, we miss 1 in 3 moderate severe TBI cases. So more work is needed there going forwards, which I've sort of been progressing in the background. For the pedestrian and cyclist model, it was a little bit better, but we still get 5% under triage and 70% over triage, which is a little bit away from the 5% under triage and sort of 50% over triage recommendations from, for example, the American College of Surgeons. And then we did find we improve prediction substantially when we start to include things like demographics, seatbelt status, age, sex, and pre-existing health conditions, and also intoxication status. So those are all elements that we're taking forwards and have kind of other work going on with impact around some of those elements and entrapment. Because sensors not only take the kind of peak value of the crash, they also have kind of contain the whole signature, which we expect to kind of relate through to injury more. With some work that's been funded by the Road Safety Trust, taking some data from the University of Adelaide, who have a really amazing world-leading data set in this space. We've looked to combine not only these static predictors like we did before, but additionally including these time series pulses that really characterize the crash overall and some images. And we essentially found that by combining all of these different elements, we can massively improve the predictions, especially in reducing under triage and cutting down that over triage a little bit as well. So I'm really excited going forwards to try and apply this to other time critical injuries as we go. So here's kind of my first example of where I was supported by mentors around me to have better access to opportunity that has then kind of looking back 6 years down the line made a really big difference to my sort of career trajectory. So I mentioned that a lot of our work is kind of pretty translational, so it's quite natural that some of it goes on to inform policy, and some of this work around predicting injury outcome indeed did that. That was in part because one of my 4 PhD supervisors very early on, who were all male, 3 out of 4 white males, like basically said, right, we've got this opportunity to sit on this international working group for the International Standards Organization. You can either shadow or you can lead. He was like, I think you can lead. I was much younger than I am at the time. I'm still pretty young, but I was young, relatively new to the field, and I'm quite a confident person, but I was still a bit nervous about taking this on. And the fact that, you know, I was presented with the two options, so I would have involvement either way if I wanted it, but also told that I was capable of doing it explicitly, made me say yes to this back in 2020, and actually ultimately ended up being super involved in it. And it helped both inform my research, and my research also inform the kind of the standard that's now in place. But I think had I not had a mentor who proactively sought that out, I wouldn't have found that access. So that's something I wanted to flag. This research also opened many doors for new funding and collaboration. And this is somewhere else where, again, I benefited by another mentor giving me a different opportunity. So similar to Tanya's example of, speaker lineups in road safety often being very male dominated, my primary supervisor for my PhD was contacted to talk about some of this work from the UK in-depth crash data set, which I'm the person who was kind of, led that work on a day-to-day basis. And he immediately said, that's Claire's work, you should ask her, she'll present that instead. And then messaged me quickly saying, hope you don't mind. I didn't mind. When the day came round, there were sort of 250 leaders from the automotive sector, and I was really just the only women on that lineup of around 24 speakers for that day. And it went super well. We ended up forming a whole nother study off the back of it, because somebody from Sony found it really interesting, saw that we had similar data. That then led to more grant funding. So it really kind of snowballed at quite an early stage in my career to be really, really fantastic. But all because I had a mentor who was very willing to take the back seat and not have the exposure from quite a high profile event. And that's definitely an example where, at an early stage, I was given that opportunity. We all gained out of it, I think, because we end up with new collaborations, new funding coming in, etc. But I think, especially in academia, sometimes it's a little bit more traditional and it's unusual to have a mentor that gives, or as many mentors, to be honest, that give a lot of high profile exposure to early career scientists and engineers. So that's definitely something that anyone who's in a mentorship position I try to take on now, is trying to find opportunities, because you don't know what they'll lead to. This talk could have just gone by and gone quiet, but actually it ended up being quite kind of pivotal in terms of what it gave me afterwards. And then just a couple of other areas to kind of wrap up and I suppose kind of bring in some of that collaboration elements. I mentioned that we're not just focused on the technical side, so we're really fortunate to have this Road Safety Trust funded grant where we've worked with one of the ambulance services, the South East Coast Ambulance Service, and directly interacting with Emergency Operations Centre staff to identify kind of key challenges in actually getting systems like this up and running. And we have found essentially from these focus group interviews that there's a real need for richer, trustworthy information, that any tools should support, not replace, professional judgment, and that workflow and usability in high pressure calls that often require interagency operability is really, really important. So that's something that we're looking to progress kind of forwards. And then just to close off with a kind of, where am I going with this work? So a lot of what I've shown has been based on sensors that are mounted on vehicles, but we know globally that the trauma burden is often those outside of vehicles, or if they're in vehicles, those vehicles are not connected to emergency infrastructure like we're fortunate to have in the UK. So my current work is centered on using low fidelity accessible sensors that are already available for other means, and really kind of embodying that design engineering context of doing things better, rather than just making better things. Now that 60% of the world own a smartphone, they have kinematic sensors in, there's already some kind of crash detection, but they miss outcome data and the sensors are kind of poor. So I'm looking to kind of link that through to physical test data and digital twins, to use biomechanics as a means to understand those crashes. And I've just got a quick video to finish up with. This is a staged crash from one of our collaborators who allow us to collect device data in that. Here's the app that you can see that we use, and then working with a major vehicle manufacturer and Euro NCAP as well to collect more tests. And those kind of in-kind contributions that have been given, to me as a kind of PI of that work, are super important, and I'm very grateful to kind of be surrounded actually by a lot of institutes who are very willing to invest in me as a female engineer at a relatively early career stage. And then final slide, one of the things that I've also really benefited from, and I think we can all kind of offer each other, to be honest, but is kind of in-field mentorship and how that builds confidence. So this is a picture from the Injury Biomechanics conference last year, with Karina Klug on the left, who does amazing work in computational modelling, really pushing lots of equity-based metrics in that crash testing, and then Astrid Linder, who's done the same on the physical test side. She was recognised as one of the 100 most inspirational women of 2023 by the BBC because she's created the first 50th percentile crash dummy. But what I really appreciate about her is seeing her once or twice a year, and she's always willing to have a conversation. She's worked on this, like last time we spoke, she'd shared on this for, towards 35 years. She's been finding different ways to progress this work, and she's been really dogged at how she's done that. She's kind of reframed it to pull in the funding, and the smartphone idea is a little bit out there for a lot of the more traditional road safety community, and she was really encouraging in terms of like, yeah, go ahead, try it, like do something that's a little bit out there, reframe it, align with the morals that, the morals and the values that you have. And I think having people around where you can see that is super, super valuable. Loads of amazing collaborators to thank, especially lots of amazing students that have kind of enabled a lot of this work. And I'll leave the floor so that we have plenty of time. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was amazing as well. Such a great talk. I always love hearing about your work, and it's been really nice listening to a bit more of the personal reflections of the women that you work with as well. Like, yeah, looking forward to the questions and answers later around that. So, last but absolutely by no means least, we've got Associate Professor Shweta Gidwani. So Shweta's going to be talking about reclaiming generosity, lessons from the front line of global health. Shweta is an emergency medicine physician, an academic and educator in global emergency and injury care. Drawing from her journey as a woman on the front lines of global health, she's seen that the most transformative impact comes from radical, purposeful generosity. So I'll hand over to you.
I'm going to test technology and hopefully see that my slides actually work. Once I've got that out of the way, I'll feel a little bit more. There we go. Could you see my slides?
Yes, they're in a different mode to earlier though. They're not. I think we've got. That's it. Fab. Fantastic.
All right. Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for having me here. And what wonderful talks that I've just heard. I feel so inspired. So thanks to the Impact team for having me. I'm going to talk to you about this theme of generosity, but really with a sort of global health lens and some personal reflections and personal stories. And, the International Women's Day theme for 2026, as described by the UN, is actually rights, justice, and action. And actually, to me, generosity is the perfect candidate, the perfect kind of actionable candidate towards that journey. So, as I said, I'm an emergency medicine clinician in London, and an academic and a kind of field global health practitioner. And I'm really lucky to be supported by a number of fabulous colleagues and mentors, many women actually, and also supported by a number of institutions that are here. But I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my story and who I am, because undoubtedly that shapes a lot of my thinking and a lot of my work and a lot of my research, really. So I started as a clinician working in the slums in Mumbai, and I worked in a number of different hospital and healthcare settings, from major trauma centers in Bombay, as well as sort of district general hospitals, and then at the bottom right corner is the village hospital that now is a building. But when I worked there 20 years ago, it was really a cow shed with a tin roof and no running water. And over the last 23 years. So my journey has really been a series of kind of oscillating journeys between these two sort of worlds of poverty and privilege. And so my reflections are always around how do these two worlds kind of blend, and how do they collide, and how do they collaborate? I'm going to start with a story, and this goes back 23 years ago, and it's in one of those emergency care settings where I was working as a green-eyed intern. And I remember the first time I saw somebody die. This woman called Shanti, she presented to a chaotic casualty receiving space, as is here, with this severe epigastric pain. And essentially that sort of pain right here in the, just sort of below the breastbone. And it basically meant that nobody really owned her care. So she went between surgeons and medicine departments that were on either side of this busy hall, while people were trying to figure out what was wrong with her. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos and confusion, I saw her kind of go ashen gray and slump and die. Now, Shanti didn't die because of necessarily because of a heart attack, a stroke, a bleeding blood vessel, or some other catastrophic surgical problem. She really died because she had something else. She had an acute, undifferentiated problem. And essentially that meant that she was nobody's patient. And this is the crux of the problem in low and middle income countries and low resource settings, where vast swathes of the population in a crisis, in an acute care situation, or indeed in an acute injury situation, are in an undifferentiated problem and are received in centers of chaos with limited resources, usually by providers who don't really want to be there. They find this work laborious, it's difficult, it's challenging. They're not seen as specialists, they're not seen as people with a career progression. And usually it's the least qualified profession who receives these patients. And as we've heard already, that 50% of deaths in low and middle income countries really occur from kind of acute illnesses and acute injuries. And it is that first crucial response, and it is a type of clinician who can manage an undifferentiated acute illness or an undifferentiated injury, be it trauma, bones, lung, head, whatever it might be, the acute undifferentiated injury pattern. And the lack of response to that immediate care is a significant problem. And while we would rather be not having these kinds of illnesses and injuries, and certainly in global health and public health, we're very prevention focused, as we should be, we can't forget that for most people in these sort of settings, by ignoring the lack of response, by forgetting a systems approach, we are being disingenuous to their condition, to the system that we work in, and effectively are eroding trust that impacts our ability to do good research in this space, trust that impacts our ability to actually save lives, trust that actually prevents us from being authentic in thinking about where funding should be directed. And of course, injury, we've already heard again, injury-related deaths are really significant, and beyond the big numbers, 4.5 million deaths per year, where 90% happen in low and middle income countries. The issue of burden of disability is really significant, because injury is a condition of young people. Globally, 180,000 children and young and adolescents die because of injury-related deaths. It's a really catastrophic problem with huge implications on the economy, productivity, disability, etc. And within that, we're also in a situation where we are perpetuating a narrative that is driven by data bias. We already know some of that with regards to the fact that we actually haven't been doing those sort of crash testing and safety prevention testing, with women in mind, their anatomy, the pelvis, the structure of the pelvis, etc., hasn't really been found its way in sort of the crash test dummies, etc. We do know that women are disproportionately affected and are likely to have higher injury, severe injuries and death. But there's even more to the story here, and that is depicted here in this picture. Really, what are the social, political, and cultural narratives behind this picture? What is the context? What's driving this very vulnerable, family on a road as in a two-wheeler like this? We just don't include this kind of thinking in the research and data, and it doesn't find its way, therefore, into kind of global priorities. We, for example, here, if we think about just the cultural norms, the attire, the clothes, the low hanging, the sort of flare hanging cloth, the scarf injuries from women in many parts of this world where scarves are trapped. Helmet designs, etc. So for 90% of the world where injury-related death is significant, we have really got a lot of gaps and a lot of biases because they just don't find their way into our conversations, into our research, and it sort of self-perpetuates where global priorities are. And so fundamentally, we kind of live in this situation where some lives just matter less. And truly, that is the root of all that is wrong in this world. But what can we do about this? And certainly, how can we do this in this current climate where across the board, high and low income countries, there is budget cuts and finances are a problem. And we are listening all the time to the narratives around the shift in global health priorities and multilateral funding, etc. And what I've seen is that's kind of shifted even further a mindset, a scarcity mindset, where it seems to be that everybody wants to hunker down, prioritize their work, hold on to knowledge, hold on to power, hold on to resources, hold on to networks, and actually is creating further siloed working, and indeed is preventing us from really working in a manner that our patients, our systems want us to. And I think that is why this time, more than ever before, is a time where we really need to be shifting into a generosity mindset. And as I said before, generosity to me is really the most suitable, actionable candidate towards advancing that idea of justice, equity, and really trying to close the gap on this really big problem and this massive big divide where certain lives are just ignored. And so what kind of generosity am I talking about, and what do I mean by that? It's a kind of generosity that's going to really allow us to critically think about where the power dynamics lie, and how might we see some of that power to bring people who are closest to the problem onto a seat at the table. So here is a question that was asked, like how global is global health, when out of 198 global health organizations, you can see where most headquarters are dominated, and that's 19% of the world population, compared with 83, with 80 plus percent of the global majority. And so there is a real issue with us being able to tackle this problem where we are effectively at such a distance from the problem. And it goes back to my point about why this perpetuates the issue of sort of structural bias and also of mistrust in research, mistrust in health. So it's the kind of generosity that lifts people. It's the kind of generosity that lifts, as I said, people closest to the problem. We've talked a little bit about sort of the gender bias in leadership, and here is some data around women in global health leadership, and you can see the pyramid here, and as you go higher up into more significant sort of roles like CEOs and things like that, you find that actually representation for women is fairly limited. And I think it was touched upon a little bit upon earlier in Claire's talk, is also there is an ageism here as well. I think there's also an issue of got to sort of earn your stripes and wait for time. And there's a real, it's really important to also recognize actually those on the front line who are, the next generation, who can help, who are nearer to the problem, who can actually help us see things a little bit more clearly and really drive our research priorities and sharpen our focus. And that's going to require a level of generosity of bringing those voices to the table, of generosity of time and space. And it's the kind of generosity that is actionable by a simple act of accompaniment, which is really about sticking with the task, the person, the problem, right the way through, till the accompanier has deemed the task to be finished, this is Paul Farmer, founder of Partners in Health. And that is a kind of generosity that is not about money and funding, and it's incredibly powerful and undoubtedly transformative. And ultimately, I think that's the kind of generosity that will save lives. That's the kind of generosity that will change systems, that will help us move from that response to system approach to prevention approach. Because by separating these pieces out, both in our research and our thinking, as I said before, we do risk mistrust, because in these settings where the problem really ought to be, largely tackled with prevention, the poorest and most vulnerable do want us to also acknowledge and recognize that in the time of crisis, the health system regularly fails them. And in the end, this is really about very clearly having a kind of moral view and a philosophical view that actually, without a doubt, a generosity that's collaborative, that's bidirectional, that's mutually supportive, has huge gain for us personally, individually, and institutionally, and as groups. And I think recognizing that and being clear about that moral stance is also important. And this is a great quote that I'm going to end on, Leila Watson, which basically is that generosity isn't about helping. It's really recognizing that if you just want to give without any intentionality and thinking, then you're wasting time. But if you come because your liberation is bound with mine, then working together is the way forward. And that's the kind of generosity that I think is incredibly powerful and transformative. And, like others have said, my career and my trajectory and my space here in these positions of power and privilege have really been because of generous support and leadership and mentorship from a variety of amazing people. And their generosity has been, time, has been giving a voice, has been sponsorship. So supporting and sort of advocating for me to be in spaces that I didn't think I could be, should be, would be. And that's the kind of generosity that others have alluded to as well, is transformative and is absolutely our game. So that's it for me.
Thank you. That was so interesting. 3 very different talks, all really, really relevant and interesting. Really honoured to be here to listen to you all speak. So I'll just open it up now to see if anybody's got any questions to aim to the panel. I think there was one in the chat. Oh, which Claire you've answered in the chat. So if anybody's
as well.
if anybody's got any questions. I might do a chair's prerogative then in that case and ask one. We've got a range of sort of experience within the sector here, I think, in terms of how long you've all been working in it, in terms of a couple of you have said it's quite male dominated. And it made me think about the barriers to those types of fields. So within physics, within maths, I guess within STEM, within road safety, those types of areas. I like to think things were getting better. I saw a publication the other day from King's College London that said that the rate at which Gen Z generation boys feel that women should be traditional and stay at home has risen. I think it's like a quarter compared to something like 12% of the boomer generation. So you'd like to think things are getting better and not worse. But have you noticed changes in terms of what the barriers to entry into these particular fields might be over time and what they are now, and what might be some of the solutions? And that's to any of you.
I can start off if you like. So I guess maybe less of a reflection over time. So for context, I've been in the field, I guess, since starting my PhD, like 10 years approximately. 9 years, I think, actually. I think at least from a kind of engineering perspective, and not necessarily so much road safety, but engineering specifically, I think a lot of the doors are unfortunately closed quite early on, in terms of requiring a mathematical or physics background. This is something that I talk to my partner a lot. He's a secondary school science teacher, and is constantly trying to increase access to science at an earlier stage. But unfortunately, it's really difficult to transition into a like strongly engineering based field without either a mathematical or strong physical sciences background through schools. It's not impossible. There are like translation programs. Those do exist, but I think those barriers are often closed long before. So engaging with, like, being part of a university, I'm very interested in then outreach to help, not just increase gender equity through the door, but increase access across the board through the door. And I think a lot of those schemes it's really early. It's like it's instilling confidence in kids that are probably like starting secondary school, and they'll have no idea that the subject selections they make at whatever 14, 16 go on to actually open or close doors in different ways. So I don't know if that's so much of a trend, but I think actually it's often earlier than we think. There are obviously ways to transition between fields, but actually instilling that confidence, if that's lost early, I think it's really hard to recover from. So that's somewhere where I'm personally like going to schools quite a bit, because I've got loads of friends that are teachers, so it's easy access for me, sort of thing. But that's somewhere where I see making a difference, and schemes like the Education Development Trust, who like link up students with good like work experience placement opportunities, just to kind of open kids' horizons to like what they actually, they are what they're capable of, or like what they might be interested in that they hadn't necessarily thought might be a direction. Yeah, I'll leave the floor.
Let's have Tanya.
I think actually the road safety world has evolved quite a lot in the 20-bit years I've been involved. And I'm wondering if actually the move to safe system thinking is helping there, because we had, kind of very classical engineering, enforcement and education kind of arms to road safety. And the education arm was generally where the women sat, and the other two areas were very much more male dominated. And I think actually being much more kind of systems thinking in our approach to road safety has allowed different pathways into the sector, which is much more encouraging. I think certainly when I joined as well, it's a small community, and there were these stalwarts who'd been there forever, and it almost felt like these older gentlemen were blocking the way for some of these other, kind of great young minds coming through. And I think we've opened up quite a lot in the last, particularly 10 years, to as I say, bring in different pathways. Involving research, the researchers in the room as much, as part of road safety, which I don't think we used to do previously. I think it was much more practitioner focused as well, which embedded those divisions. So I'm quite positive. I think we're, as Claire says, we've kind of got to still break down barriers between specific subjects, but I think road safety itself is being much more open, and that's reflecting the kinds of research and the kinds of policy outcomes that we're getting, which is all really great.
Yeah, just going back to Claire's point as well. I think what I found to be really important is getting people to see different possibilities and see themselves as different people from a kind of mentorship perspective. So I'll give you an example. This morning, I mentor a number of young, very talented researchers, just like, in my free time, all across sort of a number of East African countries and Pakistan, India, anybody who comes, basically. I'm like, yeah, sure. And they're so used to thinking of themselves as data collection. So we're doing a study together. It's a very simple study that we're just kind of like co-designing, co-developing this. And I'm kind of like taking them through that whole process. And it's like, when can I start doing data collection? I'm like, you need to see yourself as the researcher who's actually designing the research tool. So we're at the stage now where we're co-designing this research tool. So, it's really getting people to see a possibility of a different reality. And it's really interesting. Like I said, I come from, I went to medical school in India and stuff like that. And, the institutional biases to actually to get into anything is so driven by, you need to have a degree, a higher degree, that is I was enrolled in a master's program back in the day, 20 years ago, and I couldn't afford it. So I stepped out of it and I couldn't carry on. But and that if you see the map, most of higher degrees are actually available really only in the high income settings. So if we want to tackle the problem, back to my kind of like equity stance, if we want to tackle the problem in low and middle income countries, yet we close the kind of like leadership spaces, the decision-making spaces, the seats at the table by saying, actually, you've got to have a higher degree from a higher institution. You're just like never going to achieve that situation. And so there are some real structural biases, and it's not intentional. These are unintentional, but they are self-perpetuating. And that's where the generosity piece comes in, which is really, it's not about money. It's actually the reason I got in here, because, somebody said to me, actually, you know what? We want you as part of our faculty. This is 17 years ago. And I was like, me? I'm like, yeah, you. And then suddenly 5 years later, it's like, actually, you're actually on an academic faculty track. Am I? I had no idea, because, how would I? Because I never came from that sort of situation. So that's structural kind of issues that we need to break down and invite people to the room.
Some fantastic reflections there. There's a theme I'm picking up, and that is, we think of diversity, don't we? We think about having more women represented. We think about having more of various different characteristics represented. But there's that inclusion piece as well. Like, it's all very well saying, okay, well, we'll have some more people at the table, but and I've picked up on a few things that you've all said around, well, they wanted me there, or they pushed me forward, they said I was capable. And I think that's equally as important, because that it makes you feel included, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think within the sector as well, road safety, injury, what I'm learning more and more is, there's so many incredible people working with so many different perspectives. So whether it's the engineering, the computing, the roads, the safety, the safe mobility, the design, and then, us clinicians in the sort of post-crash and emergency care system space. And actually, it's taken a long time to get to a point where we're all talking to each other and actually in the table. And, there are a lot of policy meetings around road safety where you don't see any healthcare professionals or clinicians, not out of any intentionality, but that's just the way it has been. And so, the system, is not doing itself justice to kind of actually be more joined up. And frankly, that world has got to change, because there just isn't enough resources to do it that way.
Fantastic. Has anybody else got a question at all for the panel? Okay, so is it Karen? I think, is that right, or Frendo?
Good afternoon. It's Karen
Hello?
Mukallef. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
We have noted, I am a senior staff nurse with the ambulance control room in Malta. And we have seen a rise in these AI cars that are getting more, giving us more information where they are and everything. Unfortunately, we don't always get the information beforehand. Like, we're not given studies about it and how to react to it before we started receiving them. So the first time a car called me, it was crazy. And the thing is, I think that, as you said, there needs to be a link between what AI is doing and the human factor. Thanks.
Thank you. Did anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's no good developing, technology with amazing promise if the groundwork is then not done to either engage with people who actually need to use it, ideally early on in co-design process, as Shweta was saying about, any kind of research, like initiating the co-design really early on. And with training, that's the same issue that you just raised. We've seen in our interviews within the UK ambulance call centres as well, where it's maybe mentioned once briefly, and then all of a sudden you've got a car that's talking to you and has set up a voice link, and the people inside have no idea what's going on, and it's full-blown chaos. So I think despite the kind of best intentions, that lack of consideration of both that human side and that technical side leads to a lot of challenge. And that's where, I guess, as a design engineer, that's where I'm hoping to focus a lot of my work is around those different elements, and kind of that's what's led me to work with Impact and other kind of collaborators in that space as well. So hopefully it'll get better, but agree, it's a big challenge, and it's probably not going to get easier with the speed at which AI is progressing as well.
Thank you. Lauren.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, that's all been so interesting to hear your different perspectives and experiences. Mentorship came up quite a lot from each of you. So I guess my question was just more that it's fantastic when you have a mentor and you have that person to help you and to give you advice or to give you those opportunities. But yeah, so when you don't have one, what would you recommend that women do to either fill that gap, or what in your experiences when you maybe haven't had a mentor, what's helped you to progress or to get some solidarity, security advice?
Thanks for that question. I'm gonna jump right in, because I actually do teach some leadership And so this is a space that I'm actually interested in. Because one of the first and early things that I learned from one of my mentors is how to seek mentorship, and actually how to effectively be a mentee, which is something I constantly reflect on even now, and in both roles, because I think all of that kind of evolves. But it was a really, like, that was a light bulb moment for me. And it wasn't about, and actually the way she framed it was, because this was one of the questions I sort of asked, and I said, well, it was around a sponsorship. It was around a piece where she kind of put me forward for something. And I said, and she was like, actually, you know what? You have gone out and sought people. You've gone and met. You've sought out mentorship. It's like, oh yeah, I think I did. I didn't realize what I was doing. And so that's one thing I would say, is that you can totally design and own that space by, one can do that. And the world is so connected right now. And my experience with all my mentors, by the way, are people, most of them actually are people like I never knew before, or I wasn't connected to many institutions, right? I actually sought them out. Most of the most incredible people I've worked with and met with, leading people in the field, have been very generous with their time. And that's been a distinct difference. And because they sort of embodied that give to gain situation, like, actually, yeah, this is I want to learn more, the curiosity piece, so that's all I'm going to say to that. And
yeah, I think there's something really in that, the idea of kind of seeking out your mentor and finding out when you need to be mentored. So I think there's actually, there have been a few places where it's like, I need to stop now. This is the right place for me to kind of step back and almost give that space to somebody else to take advantage of. And I think the other big thing is networks. Just building people around you who, it doesn't need to be a formal mentoring program. It's about having that community where you can support each other, just asking the simple little questions that help you on your path.
Yeah, very little to add to two great answers. I think for me, when seeking, it's not being shy. Like, the worst that someone can say is no. And if they say no, then I'm not in a worse place. And as has been mentioned, I think oftentimes people have probably also benefited from this kind of give to gain mentality through their careers, and they remember how it was at earlier stages. And I think that, for me, at least in my earlier career stage, I think I've definitely seen the benefit of that, where people will mention, oh, this person X, just like Shweta just did, it's like said this to me at this time point. And I think because those, whether it's formalized or informalized mentorship, because that has such a big impact, I feel like it does stay with people, and the generosity there does tend to come more often than it doesn't. And not being shy to seek and ask and build that network, and also lean on, maybe slightly different to mentorship, but peers as well. I think people at a similar stage or even like different stages in either direction as well. I feel like you can learn a lot from everybody, really, in different contexts, and that, depending what you're seeking, that can also be valuable to remember, that even people at peer stage can often provide some of those mentorship elements, if not the same access and network and kind of experience.
Fab, that was a great question, Lauren. Thanks for that. So if no one else has any other questions, no. In that case, I would like to offer a massive thank you to Tanya, Claire and Shweta for giving their time today